You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. They'll be with us from now right up until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Brexit deal within days. That's the front of the Times, which has Rishi Sunak on the verge of solving the Northern Ireland Protocol problem after talks with the EU president. And that story also makes the lead in tomorrow's Telegraph. The Financial Times goes with a warning from the West to any country aiding the Russian war effort against Ukraine that they would face severe costs. The Mail leads with a plea from the mother of a woman whose daughter was killed by her estranged husband not to release him on parole after serving half of a 26-year jail term. The Express reports that the Queen Consort's remarks on Thursday have forced a U-turn on the decision to change parts of some books by Roald Dahl in case they caused offence to new readers. The Star returns to the fruit and veg shortage in our shops, attacking Government Minister Therese Coffey for her suggestion that people should eat turnips instead. While the Mirror says her suggestion has backfired and put the government in a stew. Possibly a vegetable one. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Telegraph, the front page of the Telegraph. And Rishi Sunak's hopes to secure a new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland over the weekend. He's hoping to secure this deal. There have been various interventions, and his route to securing this deal has not been easy, shall we say. Susie?
Well, yeah, I can swear I saw exactly the same headlines last weekend when Rishi Sunak was on the brink of a breakthrough Brexit deal. We've got the same now. It seems that we are getting to, further to the point where there may be some kind of fudge. But don't let the viewers be disabused here. Rishi Sunak hasn't fixed the central problem of Brexit, which was that we have one land border with the EU, and it's a land border we're not allowed to control. If you're going to leave the EU, you have to have an edge. You have to have a border in order that you can demark the different areas where you have different tax regimes, different regulatory regimes, different customs, and so on and so forth. And you can't do that with the Northern Irish border. We're not able to do that under the Good Friday Agreement. And what we've got here is basically a series of talks have got to the point where the last Prime Minister and then another one, Boris Johnson, was told that his law to try and fix the Brexit deal was going to be illegal and was going to be challenged in the international courts if he pushed it through. And so Rishi Sunak has had no choice but to try and renegotiate a better deal. He does appear to have got something better. Let's not criticise the man for that. And he's done it without willy waving, which Boris Johnson did an awful lot of, without threatening to invade anybody or, rustling any flags or anything like that. But unfortunately, it still involves treating Northern Ireland differently to the rest of the United Kingdom. It doesn't matter how you package it. We will be treating Northern Ireland and sending goods to and from Northern Ireland in a way that we do not for Scotland and Wales. And therefore, we're treating the people of Northern Ireland differently, even though they are full citizens of the United Kingdom. That breaches what was on the Brexit referendum ballot paper. It breaches our own internal laws, creating the union with Northern Ireland in the first place. But it's probably the best they're going to be able to find. But it is a fudge. However, it's all about now. This is where we're coming down to the last hurdle here, is actually how it's packaged and how it's sold to people. And it will be sold to you as a solution. It's not a solution, it's a fudge.
And Henry, we still don't know whether the new agreement will be accepted by the Democratic Unionist Party, and they've demanded that European courts have no say whatsoever in Northern Ireland. So that hasn't been resolved as far as we know.
No, it hasn't. Fundamentally, Rishi Sunak is carrying a cross that was built for him by previous prime ministers, especially actually Theresa May, because in fact, the text of the Belfast Agreement does not mandate that the UK cannot control the land border. It was basically a political decision that was made by the May government that there should be absolutely no infrastructure on the land border. That was locked in with the EU during her stage of the negotiations, and now obviously they're unwilling to row back from that, and that does fundamentally change Northern Ireland's position in the United Kingdom. And the unionist argument, and it's not just the DUP, all of the unionist parties opposed to the protocol, is that this is a breach of the terms on which they signed the Belfast Agreement in the first place. There's a real disjuncture in the government's strategy on this, because constitutionally, Rishi Sunak can agree a deal with the European Union. He can have it signed off in Parliament. Labour have said they will back it. That's fine. But the timeline of these negotiations from the beginning has basically been about getting Stormont, the Northern Ireland Devolved Assembly, back up and running in time for April, which is the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, when Joe Biden wants to visit and everyone wants to kind of celebrate that achievement. And that's not going to work if the DUP don't accept it. So there's a real gap between Rishi Sunak's timetable, which is geared around that Stormont deadline, and his determination to strike a deal with the European Union, force it through Parliament, when he hasn't squared the DUP. The problem with this, and this goes all the way back really to David Cameron, is that there is just this habit of negotiating deals privately with Brussels and then presenting them to Northern Ireland, when in fact the people of Northern Ireland on both sides need to be in the room. You can't be making these deals in private and then selling them to unionism at the last minute and hoping they back down. And if they don't back down, well, you've built up enough head of steam that you have to push on anyway. Rishi Sunak should have known when he was negotiating, or when his team was negotiating, whether this would be acceptable to the DUP. He should not be finding it out at this stage in the process.
But we read that the Conservative MPs have been told that they must turn up at the House of Commons on Monday, this being a further sign that he expects the deal to be ready. So we shall keep our eyes peeled on that one. Let's move on to the Times, and obviously it's the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine today. President Zelensky saying that they need more weapons to bring this to a conclusion, again making another appeal for weapons. Susie?
Yeah, I can understand the reluctance that some NATO countries have had to try and get too stuck into some kind of a quagmire, or actually to be seen, obviously, to be going toe to toe with Russia. But the simple fact is, this was a war that Russia cannot win. It was expecting a 3-day war. It's been there for a year. It is bogged down. But it is throwing human beings at the front line without apparently noticing or caring how many of them survive the process. It is shelling from a distance, and it has control of the air. It can therefore pummel Ukraine. It can't win, but Russia can pummel Ukraine for a long time to come. And eventually, Ukraine, which does not have its own defense industry in the way that many other nations do, is going to run out of ways of defending itself and could get overrun to some extent. Now, Ukraine itself also cannot win. It's too small. It's just not got enough in terms of the troops and the equipment to do it. But if it's armed properly, if it's given air defense systems, if it's given tanks, if it is given the ability to control some of its own airspace, then far more than it can now with a handful of MiGs, then it has a real chance of being able to push Russia back to the borders and to reestablish those borders and keep them safe. And that's in everybody's interest, because if Russia overruns Ukraine in any way or manages to wear it down, then that's next step is going to be Germany. The next step is going to be pushing further into Europe and other NATO countries. It's Finland, it's Sweden, it's the other nations which are right on the edge of Eastern Europe then, which don't need that. And it would be very, very dark for all of us. So it is in our best interests to find a way through the difficulty we've got with not wanting to have all-out conflict with Russia, but needing to arm Ukraine. And Zelensky's right. If he gets the weapons, he can win it, because there's nothing that fights as strong and as hard as people who are fighting for their homeland. That's what Ukrainians have done. It's what they are doing. It's what they'll continue to do. It's what the Russians absolutely aren't doing. That's why they're relying on mercenaries and former prisoners, who the Mirror's been interviewing this week, who've been sold a pack of lies about why they're there and how they're going to be armed. We've also got elsewhere in the papers today that the head of the Wagner group, these mercenaries, is furious at the defense minister in Russia because his men aren't even getting munitions They're having to take them down to the front line, throw them at the Ukrainian guns, and they haven't even got enough arms themselves to have any chance of a fight. So it's an absolute bloodbath. And the only way, really, it's the humanitarian option to bring this conflict to an end as quickly as possible. And that involves giving Ukraine the tools and the muscle that it needs to stand up to this bully.
OK. Henry, take us to another story in the Times. This is about a crime crackdown, which we read is set to push prison numbers past 100,000.
Yeah, so basically the government, there's a lot of public dissatisfaction about the fact that people who are convicted of crimes end up being released for often only serving half their on-paper sentence because of the current rules about being eligible for parole after that time. And so the government has said, right, for many crimes, I'm not sure if it's all crimes, it's now going to be 2/3 minimum tariff before you are released. They're also increasing police numbers, which could mean more convictions and more people going into the prison system. This is a problem because there's only so much space in the prison system, and the civil service and the prison system are very worried that there's going to be this inflow of new prisoners at the same time as they're having to hold on to current prisoners for longer than they currently have. And that's going to strain capacity because fundamentally, if you want to pursue this kind of high imprisonment system, which is a perfectly legitimate system and lots of the public would like it, you do need to have invested in building lots of prisons. In fact, the government's opened a few. It also randomly shut one because Ken Clarke didn't like the fact that it was in a castle. HMP Lancaster Castle was shut a few years ago. But so the government has not built enough prisons. The prison estate is too small, and it's now creating potentially this huge pressure, which is going to cause problems of standards. It's going to create problems for prisoners, and ultimately it will probably mean a reverse of the policy if more prison space is not provided relatively quickly.
Susie, we've just got less than a minute to talk turnips. The Tories are in a stew over turnips. How so?
Yes, because
paper,
having told everyone that there's a problem with tomatoes and cucumbers, and it's definitely not to do with Brexit, Therese Coffey suggested people eat turnips instead. And the problem with that is we don't have enough turnips, largely because of Brexit. And the main turnip grower in the UK has actually stopped growing them because they can't get the labour anymore, thanks to the EU labour shortages since Brexit, in order to actually pick the damn things. And what people don't seem to realise, and Therese Coffey especially doesn't realise, is we produce about 5 billion turnips a year in this country. If every human in this country was to have one turnip a day, we would need about 25 billion. We don't have enough turnips to feed us. Most of our turnips are used to feed livestock, and so that reduces the amount we have as well. We import all our turnips because we don't have enough here. And guess where we get our turnips from? Europe. It's a really sticky wicket, isn't it?
Yes, you might call it that. Harry, your view on the turnip situation. Some supermarkets have taken them off the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you're a government minister, there should be, is there a school? There should be a school for this. If there's a government minister and there's a shortage of something, you don't recommend that people eat something else because you just invite this kind of press coverage. Let them eat turnips is a headline that writes itself. And the fact that a government minister walked into this trap is absolutely extraordinary. If you've got a shortage, it's a bad political story, one of many for this government at the moment, but you don't needlessly pour media kerosene on it by making those remarks. And it really speaks, I think, to the political judgment of Therese Coffey that she did it.